subscribe.
A couple years back, I was grinding it out as a gas station attendant in a suburban town neighboring Decatur, Georgia. I'd been at this gig for a few months when one evening around 6 or 7 p.m., things suddenly took a creepy turn. After a long lull in customers, a sudden rush hit us, with most folks paying in cash. This wasn't unusual for a gas station job, at least not in my neck of the woods. I hustled through about 15 or 20 customers who lined up. As things finally cooled down, I kept my eyes peeled. Right around this time, an old beat-up van screeched into the station, nearly smashing into my kiosk, as it skid to a halt, and the driver hopped out. He was a lanky, pale guy in a white-ribbed tank top and grimy jeans. His body was covered with tattoos of skulls, knives, and other death-type images. Alarm bells went off in my head, although it wasn't that unusual to see tatted up people around here. Doing my best to maintain my composure, I asked him how I could assist him. He told me to fill it up and asked me for a key to the bathroom. As I handed him the keys, I noticed reddish stains on his hands and forearms, which from a distance camouflaged with his tattoos at first. As he returned to his truck, I kept a visual lock on him. He appeared jittery. He began hastily cleaning himself and then the inside of his vehicle, using up most of the paper towels in the dispenser. My attention was drawn to his passenger window, which had been shattered, and the remaining shards scattered all over the pavement. It was as though he was pushing them out of his car and onto the ground. As he noticed me checking him out, panic flashed across his face. He revved up his engine and sped off, stopping briefly in the parking lot across the street for less than a minute before disappearing into the night. Shortly after he left, another wave of customers arrived, keeping me tied up. It wasn't until an hour later that I finally had a moment to clean up the colossal mess of shattered glass the guy left behind. Upon closer examination of the shards, I made a grisly discovery. Amongst the debris were large clumps of black curly hair. These weren't just any strands. They looked like they came straight from someone's scalp, and they appeared to be stained with blood. I grabbed some latex gloves from the kiosk and carefully picked up the hair clumps, placing them into a bag, as if I were on a crime scene investigation show. I called my direct supervisor to recount the entire strange event, but he didn't seem to be at all concerned, but did ask me to give him the evidence, and he assured me that he would handle it. A few days later, I followed up, eager to know what had transpired with the evidence. My boss told me that he gave everything to the police, but they weren't planning to investigate, because as far as they can tell, no crime had occurred, and I never did hear about the matter again. I quit this job 2 weeks later. It all went down roughly 4 years ago, when my old crappy car finally decided to call it quits on me. So I decided to start hoofing it to work every day. Sometimes I'd ride my bike when I was running late, but it really wasn't that far, and I enjoyed walking. At that time, I was the new guy, which meant that I was stuck with the late shifts and ending my work night at midnight every night. But honestly, I didn't mind it much. I lived in a city that was relatively safe, and law enforcement patrolled their business districts as part of their normal route, ensuring everything was locked up tight. Almost nothing bad ever happened there. Now, it was late November, right after Thanksgiving if I recall correctly, and the temperatures had started to plummet. On a few unfortunate occasions, I even had to deal with the freezing rain. My downfall, never properly dressing for weather, and planning ahead wasn't really my strong suit. On one particular night, the weather was unusually cold, and it kept raining off and on all night. And so I decided to try a shortcut through a wooded area that could possibly shave off 15 minutes of time and get me to my warm house that much sooner. Seemed like a good idea on paper, and I didn't consider it dangerous at all. My worst case scenario was a sprained ankle. That was it. With that in mind, I plunged into the woods, oblivious to the possibilities that lay ahead. Within minutes, I had maneuvered my way through the wooded patch and caught sight of the pavement up ahead. I had successfully found my way back to the road. My sneakers barely hit the pavement though when I noticed headlights approaching from behind. Initially I thought nothing of it and continued walking. Around 45 seconds later, as the vehicle neared, it became apparent that it was some kind of tow truck. It was a rusty relic, something straight out of a black and white TV show. I initially entertained the notion that it could be one of those work trucks from a local garage. However, as it passed me, I noticed a distinct lack of familiar decals on the side. My curiosity was piqued at this point and I started to become a little nervous. The truck had rolled about 15 to 20 feet past me when it came to an abrupt halt. I'm not talking about a gradual slowdown, I mean it came to a dead stop. To be honest, this did set off a few warning bells, but I tried to brush it off and continued walking. I saw the driver roll down the window and flick a cigarette butt onto the road. Then he stuck his head out the window and called to me, something along the lines of, "Hey you." I pretended not to hear him, just wanting to carry on. But then he hit the horn. My head snapped around and I replied, "Yes, can I help you?" The driver, however, didn't stay put. He exited the vehicle and started marching in my direction. As he closed the gap, I couldn't help but notice an overpowering stench of booze clinging onto him. His eyes were glassy, bloodshot, and unfocused. It was clear he'd been hitting the bottle. He fixed his gaze on me, then pointed towards the area where I had emerged from the tree line. "Do you know you were trespassing?" he asked me accusingly. I stammered, "No, I'm sorry, I had no idea." His demeanor shifted in an instant. He looked furious, and a mere 3 inches separated our faces. He sneered, "Don't lie to me." Panic started to set in, and I didn't think this guy's motivation had anything to do with me trespassing. I couldn't shake the feeling that he probably didn't own the land I'd walked through, nor did he seem like a property owner. My instincts were to run, and so without thinking twice, I bolted, veering off the road and making my way back towards the tree line. As I did, I heard the truck's door slam shut, and that old loud engine start back up again. I retraced my steps through the woods, hell-bent on shaking him off my trail. Finally, I reached one of the city streets, reasonably confident that I had lost him. The adrenaline rush gradually faded, and I started to regain my composure. I continued my journey home, this time steering clear of any shortcuts. However, this tale doesn't end here. As I was about 3 blocks away from home, I witnessed a horrifying sight. That same tow truck came speeding through one of the red lights right in front of me, screeching to a sudden stop barely 15 feet away. It was like a scene ripped straight out of a horror movie. How could this guy possibly know my destination? There was no way he could have followed me. Panic set in yet again as I watched him exit the truck and start making his way towards me. Just when things seemed hopeless, a police car pulled up, lights blazing. It turned out that an officer had been parked across the street monitoring traffic for possible late-night DUIs. He had witnessed the man running the red light and was quick to pull him over. The officer began to question him, and I watched as he gave him a sobriety test and then placed him under arrest. After digging around, I learned that the driver was under the influence of both alcohol and narcotics, though they didn't say which ones. And unsurprisingly, he didn't own the land that I had crossed through. In fact, he didn't even reside in that city. I'm not sure what he wanted from me that night, or what might have happened if I had made that split decision to run like I did. My name is Katie. During my first year mission to Chile with my church community, I had just finished settling into our shared accommodations at the mission compound. My family had left earlier that day, and it was time to meet my mission partner. From the moment she walked in, I could tell that she was the most socially awkward person I'd ever encountered. I introduced myself, extending my hand for a handshake, but she hesitated and glanced at my hand as if she wasn't quite sure what to do. And then she let out an awkward chuckle before finally shaking hands with a very limp grip. I had to ask her for her name since she didn't offer it during the introduction, and she introduced herself as Lucy. I attempted to make small talk, but after long pauses, she responded with short answers that were totally out of context, and occasionally forcing an awkward laugh or offering a hesitant smile. Within minutes, we both ended up sitting on our respective beds, absorbed in our laptops, not exchanging a word. I felt frustrated and considered requesting a room change, convinced that anyone else would be a better roommate than Lucy. However, I soon learned that Lucy was more than just socially awkward. She had also spent time in a mental institution for some emotional issues, but I was not made aware of exactly what for. But needless to say, this information did not make me feel any better. I made acquaintances with some of the other mission members, and they seemed friendly, which was a relief. On the first night, as I returned to our accommodations after exploring the local area, I found Lucy in the same spot where I had left her. I greeted her, but she didn't respond, which was no surprise. It was now 9:30, and I didn't have any plans, so I turned the light off on my side of the room and went to bed. Sleep didn't come easily, and within an hour, I woke to find the room bathed in moonlight through the blinds. I saw Lucy sitting on the edge of the bed staring at me. Confused and uneasy, I sat up and asked her what she was doing. She whispered an apology and went back and laid down on her bed. The next morning, I woke to discover that Lucy had already left the room, seemingly the first time she's left the room since we've met. It was a Saturday, and there were orientation activities for our mission groups, and I didn't see her all that day. When I returned in the afternoon, I noticed some things out of place. It looked like someone had rummaged through our room. Upon closer inspection, I realized my computer had been stolen along with my cell phone. I immediately reported the theft to the mission coordinator, who sent some people to the room to investigate. She later reported that it was rare, but not unheard of, that some of the locals resort to petty theft. She believes that was the case here. I really had no choice but to accept her explanation, although in the back of my head, I suspected that Lucy had something to do with it. To make things worse, even though internet coverage was spotty and cell phone coverage was almost non-existent, those devices were the only means of communication that I had to get back in contact with my family and my boyfriend. Over the next 48 hours, Lucy had been bombarding me with questions about my personal life, as if she had all of a sudden taken an interest in me. I found this odd, and being that I did suspect her of stealing my stuff, I really didn't want anything to do with her. This became obvious, and the tension between us grew, and I even found myself rifling through all of her things, looking for any sign of my laptop and cell phone whenever she left the room, but nothing ever materialized. Being cut off from my family was very difficult for me. We are very close, and we never go a day without communicating. That contact grounds me and gives me the strength and encouragement that I need. On the third day after the robbery, we finally had an afternoon off, and I went into a nearby town some 45 minutes away with some of the other missionaries to explore the area and try some of the local cuisine. This town had good cell coverage, and so I was able to borrow a cell phone and make my first call back home in 3 days. As my emergency contact, I was told that my parents were called by the mission coordinators and made aware that due to the theft of my laptop and cell phone, I was not able to get in touch with them for a few days, and so they had not worried. But this is where things got very strange. My boyfriend was not made aware of any of this, but being that he was working on a merchant ship and hard to reach himself, we would often go days without communicating, and when we did, it was typically by email, as phone calls were very expensive for him to make or receive on the ship. Disregarding the cost this time due to the situation, I did call him to explain what had happened and to let him know that my communications will be difficult until I receive a new laptop from my parents, and that might take several more days. His response chills me to this very day. He asked me how it was that I had been emailing him over the last few days if all my devices had been stolen. Confused, I reiterated that I had not had any access to a computer or cell phone. He proceeded to read me the emails that I had sent him since the time that my laptop was stolen. The shock of this still haunts me to this day. He had been carrying on an email conversation with someone pretending to be me, someone who was using my laptop or my cell phone. The dead giveaway was when he read me some of the emails. They accurately detailed the events of our group over the last 2 days. It had to be someone within the group. The emails even mentioned how well I was getting along with my new roommate, Lucy. And that's when I knew 100% for sure who it was. When I got back to the mission compound, I again went to the mission leader, this time with the new evidence. And although I still could not prove that it was her, I think it was clear that it was, and that the mystery had been solved. Lucy was taken away by 2 coordinators that evening, and I never did see her again. She never confessed to stealing my devices or sending the emails, and I never did figure out what her motives might have been. And although I was never given any information about why she had been institutionalized, I suspect that the answers lie in those reasons, and that the leaders of the community probably know more than they're willing to admit.